Hello and welcome to the Fundraising Standard. My name's Adrian Sargeant and I'm a relatively rare animal in that I'm a professor of fundraising, and we think still the only full professor of fundraising that there is anywhere, which is really kind of odd when you think about how big our sector is and how significant it is in American society. I've been teaching fundraising for the best part of 30 years. I've worked at Henley Management College in the UK, the University of Exeter, and I spent 8 years as the first Hartsook Chair in fundraising at what was then the Indiana Centre on Philanthropy at Indiana University. I've also taught in Australia, Ireland, Norway, Africa, lots of different places around the world. Now, what I'm really passionate about is exposing fundraisers to the latest knowledge from academic research, but also some of the key lessons that are emerging from professional practice. And the reason I'm so excited by the notion of the fundraising standard is because this is going to be one mechanism that will really make that information, that knowledge, available to a mass audience. And I'm particularly excited by it because it'll be addressing the needs, particularly of fundraisers that are new to the profession, or perhaps working in smaller or micro-sized non-profit organisations that really maybe don't have the resources to be able to access traditional fundraising training or education. And so what the standard is an opportunity to address some of those issues and to provide 40 hours of learning over about 8 weeks of study. So folks will have to study 5 hours in each of those 8 weeks. And the idea is that it'll give them a real solid grounding in really the basics that they need to understand about how fundraising and how it works. So we'll spend time talking about the nature of the sector that they're now working in, the kinds of organisations that comprise that sector, where those organisations get their money from, and key definitions around what a 501c3 is and why that matters and the tax advantages that affords organisations. We'll then get into talking about fundraising ethics and how to operate ethically as a fundraiser, and some of the elements of fundraising planning that folk will need to understand, notably communications design and how to put forward an emotional and a compelling and an effective case for support for the organisation. And again, because this is targeted at those coming into the profession for the first time, we'll also expose them to how to get the most out of a fundraising database, some of the tools that are available, some of the issues that folks have to wrestle with, so that they're armed with really everything that they need to know to get started on their fundraising program today. And as I've said, the material that they're exposed to will be an element of research in a typical week, and also some of the learnings from professional practice. So it's a little bit of a blend of the academic and the practical. But if I'm being honest, most of what we're going to teach folk is eminently practical, right? We want people to be able to do the basics of fundraising well in their organisation. And that's where we get the title, the Fundraising Standard from. So how does the system work? Well, it's an entirely online-based platform that we're using. It's called Canvas. And what you're looking at currently there is the home screen for the Fundraising Standard. And if I scroll down, you'll see that on that home screen, there are a couple of videos there from me introducing people to the course and introducing people to the nature of the Canvas platform and how that works. Now, if you look over towards the left-hand side of the screen here, you can see that there's a very user-friendly menu. There are a couple of options here that are blanked out because I'm going in instructor mode, and students don't see those elements there. But each of the menu items that you can see offers students functionality. So there's an announcement key where I can literally talk to every member of the group if there's something interesting that's come up or there's something I need them to know. And there's a discussions tab for each of the weekly discussions that we'll be asking people to participate in. Each week of the Fundraising Standard will have a lecture from myself or a colleague. It'll have some reading which we're expecting the group to do. And there will be discussions that focus on some element of that activity, either following up on something from the lecture or from some of the reading that we've been asking people to do. And at the end of each week of study, there's a multiple choice quiz that they can use to assess how well they're doing in terms of the current state of their knowledge, whether they've understood the material that we've introduced them to that week. And of course, at the end of the fundraising standard, at the end of the full 8 weeks of learning, they will also have a multiple choice test that will draw on the whole of the spectrum of activity that we've introduced them to, so that we can test how well they've understood the teaching and learning materials. They have to get 50% in that test to pass the course and to meet, as we like to say, to meet the fundraising standard. So let me give you a flavour for what each of those weeks might look like. And I'm going to go into the modules tab here, which opens up access to all of the learning that the students have. So you can see now we're looking at week 1, which is all about the introduction to philanthropy and the sector that I described a moment or two ago. And if I drop all the way down to week 5, you can see week 5 is now going to be about developing a case for support. And you can literally go into each of the items. You can choose where you're going to go in, or you can pick up at the beginning of that sort of 5th week. So what I'm going to do is go into part of the learning materials for that week, and I'm going to highlight here designing a fundraising proposition, which, as you can imagine, is really important for fundraisers to be able to do. It's a key element of all the communications really that we put together. And as they get into that section of the material, you can see that there's a video there that they're expected to click on so that they can learn about a little piece of technology called the 4 pillars. And if I click on that... So we're going to talk now about some insight that was developed from a fundraising agency that used to be owned by my dear friend and colleague Stephen Pidgeon. And Stephen over the years has raised millions for organisations on both sides of the Atlantic, and indeed even down in Australia and New Zealand. It's a phenomenally successful fundraiser. And his agency some years ago came up with a process that you can use to think about what a fundraising proposition might look like in the context of a particular campaign. And what I'm going to do is just show you some examples of how you use the tool that they came up with, and then you'll have the opportunity to apply that to your own organisation, and we'll talk about that in one of the online forums. So, what we're going to talk about here is the 4 pillars. And for Stephen and his agency, a good fundraising proposition does indeed have 4 pillars: a vision, an enemy, a hero, and... So you get the idea that there's some introductory material provided here in the form of a video. We always make sure that the PowerPoints are available to learners in the program, so if they want to, they can take notes just as if they were sitting in a traditional classroom setting. And then you'll see that there's an exercise that we're asking people to participate in. And if I click through that, you'll see that we're asking learners on the program to identify what the 4 pillars might look like that underpin a case for support for their organisation. And they're expected there to write comments outlining what that 4 pillars would look like for their non-profit. And you can see here that there's been some comments made by one of the students in the program, and you've got some feedback there from me on what that individual has said. And you'll notice that as we go down through the feedback, we're commenting literally on every comment that the students make on the course. And if they want to, they can also comment on the comments of other students. So there's really that sort of opportunity for two-way interaction, not only with the tutor team, but also with others on the program. And in a typical week of learning, there'll be at least 2 of these little discussion forums. Everybody's expected to post in that forum, and they'll be able to interact with tutors in that space if they want to develop some aspect of that discussion. So in essence, that's pretty much how the program works. Now, I mentioned at the end of each week that participants will have access to a quiz. And if I go into the week 5 quiz here, you'll be able to see that I can... And if I go into the week 5 quiz here, you can see that the first question is, in Pidgeon's 4 pillars, vision refers to the organisation's formal mission. And you can tick true or false, and I'm going to tick false on that and go through to the next question. Stephen Pidgeon's 4 pillars are, and then you have to identify what they are: vision, enemy, hero, retention, let's say. I click on that, And I go through the quiz, and at the end of the quiz, the student will receive feedback on their answers to the quiz, and if they've got something wrong, they'll be told what's wrong, and they'll be told what the correct answer is and where they can find information on that. So each of the quizzes are really quite of a useful way for assessing the learning that's taken place that week. And as I said before, at the end of the program, there will be a test on the complete 8 weeks of study, and folks will have to get a minimum of 50% to pass that class. So that pretty much is the Fundraising Standard. We're excited by it because it's written in a very accessible way. There's a lot of interactive content. They'll have the opportunity to interact with peers in other, perhaps smaller non-profit organizations. And so they'll learn from the material, they'll learn from the instructors, they'll learn from their colleagues as they progress through that material. And we think that this is the only thing that's available on the market now to help people in smaller organizations do a massively more successful job of raising money and sustaining their non-profit. Thank you.